I'm on 15, 16, 17, 18, 3, 2, 1, 0. Welcome everyone to this session about harnessing insurance for the SDGs or Sustainable Development Goals. I'm Butch Pakani from the UN Environment Program, and I'm delighted to have a really good panel here to discuss how the insurance industry, not as insurers, we know that they can contribute as well as investors to this UN Sustainable Development Goals. The one thing that I'm quite happy about with the community of the UNAP Principles for Sustainable Insurance is that there is no shortage of women leaders. And that's not the same when you talk about the global insurance industry. The industry has to do a far better job on this. But at least in the PSI community, there's no shortage of women leaders. And so we have 3 of them with us today. So the whole topic is about the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And one could see this as really the umbrella, the compass for global sustainable development. And we know that it's forged in 2015. There's 17 of them, and as I summarized before, you can capture them in 7 words: prosperity for all on a healthy planet. If you want to keep it simple. And obviously, this comes as a very timely moment because we've just had, or are still having, 2 COPs. One is the COP15 on biodiversity, which will create a post-2020 global biodiversity framework by May next year in Kunming, China. And the other one is COP26 in Glasgow, which is now coming to its close, and everyone's paying attention to it, obviously, on what will be the final agreement. So those 2 topics are part of the SDGs. They're very central to the SDGs, and so are many others. Health, poverty, social equity. So this all comes together in the UN SDGs. So just before we go, I'd like to remind everyone that we will have a few online polls that we'll use for the discussion. Our speakers cannot see it. It will be on the Attendify platform. So if you're on that platform, you need to look at the right-hand side for the poll icon, and then we will guide you along the way when we start asking those questions. Now for the speakers, you will see it in the chat box, the results. So that's gonna guide our discussion. So let's get cracking and start with Jillian Rutherford Lisk, the head of reinsurance sustainability at Swiss Re, for some opening remarks.
Hi, thank you, Butch. Hi, everybody. Some opening remarks on one of my favorite topics, I have to say, the SDGs. And I'll put it this way. So we're in the middle of this almost explosion of attention and urgency and commitments on sustainability, right, and action. And it's really starting to feel like this decade of action, but only as long as we all, public sector, private sector, individuals, really continue to follow through on those commitments. But that's my first optimistic comment, right? We're in this decade of action, and I'm starting to see a lot of action. And this decade of action also, of course, applies to the SDGs with their target timeline of 2030. And the SDGs, whilst somewhat complex, 17 goals, 169 targets, 247 indicators, they really can serve as a blueprint or guide for the insurance industry on the many aspects of sustainability. So it helps us to go beyond climate change. It helps to see interlinkages between themes, linking climate action and protecting life underwater, as an example. It helps us to think about what life and health sustainability is, social sustainability, so what the S in ESG means. And it helps us to think about harm and contribution on all fronts in a really nuanced way. That's why I am a fan of using this framework. And whilst we don't yet have industry-wide insurance-specific indicators and targets, it's really time to do so. And we know, and what I hear from my reinsurance and insurance colleagues, in other companies is that it's time to go beyond just showing how our business contributes to achieving the SDGs and get to a point where we can demonstrate not just how, but how much. So what's actually the impact that we're making on those sustainable development goals. So I'm very pleased and encouraged to be part of this discussion today. And thank you very much for inviting me to join.
Thank you so much, Gillian. I mean, you said a lot, you covered a lot, but to someone who's newer to the topic, I mean, one can easily get lost in this alphabet soup, the SDGs, or even the whole sustainability jungle, so to speak. How are you making sense of that in a logical and efficient way at Swiss Re, where, look, there's, as you said, there's 70 goals, 169 targets. You're looking at metrics, impacts. Can you describe to us the process that happened at Swiss Re that, that made you chew an elephant in a way? Yeah. Sorry, it's a figure of speech. Maybe it's not a good thing, but
it's a good one though. It's an appropriate one in many ways. So I'll split it into the reporting part, right? So I mean, we do, as many companies do, we report out and we say, our life and health business supports good health and well-being. So, but I'll leave that aside, right? So we're going a step further than the sort of just in our sustainability report saying how does the business link. So now we are using the SDGs as part of underwriting portfolio steering. And, we're all grappling with this, how do you build sustainability into underwriting? And this is one way. And we sit down, I mean, honestly, I don't know how efficient it is, but it works. So we sit down with our underwriters and our underwriting portfolio owners, and we go through their portfolios. So if we say we take the engineering portfolio and we sit down and say, we go through every single of the 17 SDGs and say, how does our business contribute? Is there any harm? And if you take a life on land as a classic example, if we're thinking biodiversity, how do our engineering underwriting activities contribute to life on land? How do they potentially harm? We're building infrastructure and supporting infrastructure in many places that perhaps not, right? So there's definite contribution and harm element. And then we say, how material is that? Is that a tiny part of your portfolio, or is it over 50% of your portfolio? We're getting to a sense of materiality there. And then we together, after this sort of awareness raising exercise, we talk about, okay, what are the top risks in your portfolio? What are the top opportunities? Because it's also about identifying what we can do more of and what actions can we take. It makes it concrete. It gives us a lens to apply to every underwriting portfolio, and it helps us get to some concrete actions that we can take.
So you really made the effort to bring, as you said, the owners of business portfolios in the companies. I assume it wasn't that smooth at first. Probably you may have had some blank stares, and some people may even rolled up their eyes, right? So roll their eyes so a little bit, but it seems like you've gotten through that. But let's dig further into that later on as we go into discussion. This is really good insights just to make sense of something so big and something so important, and then bring it down to the level of insurance business, right? So that's some good insights from Swiss Re, which is a global reinsurer. Why don't we go to Gillian's neighbor in Zurich, and a global insurer? We have Zurich Insurance Group, very aptly, actually. And we have Linda Freiner here, is the group head of sustainability at Zurich Insurance Group, and she's also a member of the PSI board. So one of our very committed folks there. Linda, what's your take on the SDGs thinking at Zurich? Yeah.
Thanks, both, of course, for inviting me to this. And of course, I'm delighted to be on the PSI board. I think I've come at it a bit differently than Gillian. I think the SDGs are the excellent framework for understanding what are the development issues that we need to tackle. But as we've said, there are many of them. And I think that for a company, it's very important to take a materiality approach and say, okay, so which are the ones that we can really contribute to? Because of course we can say we have links to everyone, but can we really truly have an impact globally? I think there are quite few. And for us specifically, I think climate change is the big goal that we feel that this is where, from a business perspective, we can really contribute to. So that's, I think, of course, it's also important to think about the interconnectivity as well, that you mentioned. And I think as an insurance company, that's something we are used to. We're used to look at the risk maps, and we're used to look at these interconnectivity. And I think on climate change, those are becoming very, very clearer and clearer. And I think they were also a big debate at COP26 because of the fact that, and I'll come to that a bit around climate action. We've looked a lot at climate mitigation, and there's been an enormous pressure since the Paris Agreement on insurers to take an increased responsibility around mitigation. But it has been so much centered around what insurers should be doing less of, and not so much about what we should be doing more of, which I hope to be able to highlight today. Because I also think that we sometimes forget that we insure and invest in the real economy. So if we really want to drive climate action, our strongest weapon is actually to be an enabler of change of other industries and support business transformations and transitions. So I think that we spend a lot of time to talk about climate mitigation as a climate action, but in reality, climate adaptation is probably the climate action that we have the most expertise around as an insurance industry, because we know that even under 1.5 degree world, the impact of extreme weather events, sea level rises, biodiversity loss will have a huge impact on our customers, the companies we invest in, and at large. So I'm really happy that we're bringing this topic up to the agenda of talking both climate mitigation and climate adaptation as an action, because as an industry as well, we've been talking for years about the 1 to 5, 1 to 4 return on investment if you invest in prevent risk reduction efforts that can help you protect yourself against the next climate-related disaster. But if you look at from a developing economy point of view, it's very hard to do in practice, because if you have limited budgets and resources, why would a government prioritize investing in climate adaptation that may pay out in 10 years when they need to fight poverty, they need to secure food distribution, clean water, health, and all of those issues today? So I think there's quite a lot that an insurance company need to take in when you look at this specific goal.
Thanks so much, Linda, and thanks for reminding us about the big picture, because I think if you really look at the science there, I mean, even before the IPCC report a few months ago, there was already the 2018 IPCC report saying that there's a world of a difference between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees in terms of impacts, be it sea level rise, extreme heat, crop yields, etc. So we are already at global warming of 1.1 to 1.2 degrees right now, and we are aiming in Glasgow for the least worst option, which means things will get worse from where we are right now. And we want it to be better and not worse than 1.5. That's the aim. But we are already at 1.1, 1.2, and we're just hoping to limit it to 1.5, right? That's the whole agenda. So there is this mitigation part on net zero, so we avoid the catastrophic climate change, so to speak. And there's the adaptation part, which is really how do we cope with the impacts, because we have to live with those impacts in the coming years and decades. So Linda, do you want to just make that a little bit more concrete for Zurich on maybe an example for each on mitigation and adaptation? And I know that you're so passionate about both, because even before your role, you used to be leading this initiative of Zurich on flood resilience. But I think it's going to be a hard question because you have to pick one each.
It's going to be very hard because also, I mean, Butch, we have 3 different levers company, right? We have our own operations, which is our low-hanging fruit that nobody really cares about. And then we have our underwriting portfolio, and then we have our investment portfolio.
Right.
So if we look at it, set aside operations from an investment portfolio, of course, climate mitigation has been the key priority when it comes to ESG integration, when it comes to net zero commitments. And climate adaptation has probably been more of a focus within our impact investment. So where we invest in US municipal bonds that helps improve sewage systems, or whether it is type of other types of kind of government bonds. So there, I think we've been doing things and we're moving in the right direction. I think on the underwriting side, again, there's also 3 things that we can do, right? We can mitigate our own emissions, which we're now doing through with the help of the Net Zero Insurance Alliance. The other piece is around actually being a partner in the transition of our customers. So actually help them in the transition, which of course also helps lower our emissions in the end of the day. And then of course we have to look at our products and services. So how can we incentivize both climate mitigation and climate adaptation? So those different parts needs to come together. And I think at Zurich, we're really working on that holistic approach of trying to use all the different levers that we have. So very answered to a very, very important and long question.
Yes, and we have still some time. I think we started a little bit late, so I have the prerogative to extend our time until 2:05 or 2:10. So let's continue the discussion. I know climate is a very big topic. Gillian is also very passionate about nature. I'll touch on that later, Gillian. But let's go to our next speaker first. And for this segment, we have Karen Grev-Isdahl, who's the Executive Vice President of Sustainability, Public Affairs, and Corporate Communications. A very long title at Storebrand in Norway. And if I have to add, she's also the chair of the PSI board. So it's you may have one of those world records, Karen, of having very long titles if you add your PSI role as well.
Thanks. I might need to do a rebranding. But anyway, good to be here today and to speak at this European strategy meeting, I would like to say. And Europe, for all of those who listen, we should know that Europe, it's almost frightening, but we are really the leading continent. I see that in all the global networks that I sit in, that there's a tendency that the European regulators and the European companies have come the furthest. So we can be proud of that, but sometimes it's scary when you know that you're best in class, because you know it's not good enough to solve the huge problems that we have. And we really need to work on getting our, especially North American peers and Asian peers, to join all the initiatives that we have, and we are all around this table working very actively at doing that. But what the topic that the SDGs, they are huge. I remember when I started working at Storebrand, it was really taking the elephant and eating it chunk by chunk, and we did the same as a lot of we did the materiality analysis and decided where we could have an impact and where we would be impacted. Was number 13, and then number 5, the gender equality, is where we could really make a stand. But then more and more it has actually become about number 17, which I'm about to talked about today, which is the collaboration. And it became one of our founding principles that for Storebrand, that we cooperate with all kind of partners in the civil society to push the sustainability agenda. And the more I work on this topic, the more I understand that each individual company or even nation, is doing a lot, but there are some systematic large barriers to progress that we need to address through cooperation. And we need to cooperate on global levels, on regional levels that we're doing here today, and on national levels. And it's kind of it's something I would like all of those of you to listen to think, okay, if you have a responsibility for ESG within your own company, do also really think about what can you do on national, regional, and international levels to push for greater system change fast, because that's really what we need. When we at Storebrand right now, we're talking to the largest emitters in our portfolio. We've identified the 20 largest emitters of carbon obviously in our portfolio. And when we talk to them, they all list up the great things that they're doing, but they all mention this aspect of barriers to entry when it comes to international barriers to entry or lack of regulation, so to speak. So then I always ask them, what are you doing to influence? What are you doing to push for example, a global carbon tax as one example? So what are you doing to influence those large regulators to push things in the right way? We need to lobby basically for climate and for nature or for gender equality. So let's take the responsibility. We need to focus on our own operations, but we really, really need to step it up when it comes to global partnership. And this is one example of how we're doing that.
Thanks, Karen. I think the Prime Minister of Barbados had a very powerful speech last week at COP26, and she did say that she keeps on telling Barbadians that many hands make work light. So I think this is one of those examples where collaboration is absolutely key in terms of what you can do, because in one's day-to-day life, you can get easily overwhelmed by the huge challenges in front of us, and you start to wonder, what is it that I can do? And you're saying what you're basically saying is that you need to be able to use your spheres of influence to be able to engage on this topic, and there's no excuse because you have an influence as an individual or as a company. Karen, I'm just thinking, like, look, you're there at Storebrand, Swiss Re. I mean, you've been at this for so long, and you're recognized leaders in your own right. But there are companies there, even in Europe, who may not be as progressive, but who have employees and individuals who may want to do something. So, what is the thinking on how to get that going in a way where, it's nice when everything is aligned within the company, that your CEO is always out there, all the way to middle management and all the way to your client managers, but that's not always the story, right?
No, of course not. And there are large barriers to, internally in organizations. I mean, like investment capital is obviously one of them, CEO attention or board attention. The way I approached it internally to get kind of traction on this topic, because even if there was traction, you always need more and more, was to look at it from first the downside, the risk side, because that, and it gets it into our yearly risk framework, because that's really when people sit up when they realize the huge risk that all the SDGs could have on our organization. But you need data for that, and you need to do it systematically to bring the attention to top management that this is an issue that could impact us financially negative if we don't do anything. So that was my starting point, and we obviously get help from the European regulators that are really pushing this. So use the regulation that are coming as a force within the company, and then we did that for a while, and then I realized that obviously downside doesn't give any energy to anyone. It gives a sense of urgency, but it's not really what gets everybody up in the morning to think about the downsides all the time. But when we started looking at what are the business opportunities, what are our employees or clients or customers, what are they saying, what do they want, and of course your customers won't be equally mature. A lot of retail customers in Norway don't really care that much about climate, to be quite frank, because we're a petrol state, but a lot of our Swedish customers do, and a lot of our institutional customers. So identify those pockets of opportunities within your customer base that are craving and looking for the products and services that can help solve some of the SDGs. Because for the business leaders in the organization, when they see that there's a business opportunity there, when sustainability and business can go hand in hand, instead of combating each other, instead of just sustainability being a cost, when it can also be an opportunity, that's really when we got a really strong momentum in the organization. And of course, then we got help from employees saying they really want to work for Storebrand because we are such a strong purpose-driven company with a strong track record. So get up the data from your employee engagement. Basically, do the stakeholder analysis and bring that to the board or bring that to leaders to show that this can be both a huge downside if we don't tackle it, but also a huge upside.
Right. Thank you, Karen. So in a way, it seems like it's just hearing from the three of you. There is the purpose, there is the downside risk, there's upside opportunity, the link to business. But in a way, it seems to be also moving from simply qualitative to quantitative, like starting to measure things in numbers and cents and dollars, right? Is that a correct assumption, Jillian? Because you mentioned steering. Steering a portfolio means directing it towards certain targets, and you're using the SDGs for that, right?
Yes, absolutely. And we want to be able to demonstrate impact, right? So as I said before, it's the how and it's the how much. And I find that all of our stakeholders expect it, want that ever more, right? We need to be able to say to our investors, how much impact. We need to be able to say to our employees, how much impact do we have? So it's great, the commitments, yes, but we need to be able to measure it. So yes, incrementally, we're working towards that with the SDGs. As a reinsurer, sometimes that's difficult. We have treaty business, right? We don't always have the transparency over the business that's being seeded our way, but nonetheless, we're working towards it. And sometimes it starts with a qualitative assessment, then the gut feel of our underwriters, right? They have a good feel for what's in their portfolios, but we are working towards finding ways to measure. And so our institute's working on a calculator to help us come up with insurance indicators for the SDGs so that we can start to automate, calculate, measure, target.
All right.
Yeah.
So thank you. Before we go to the online polls, I'll let Linda also chime in on that, on the qualitative and quantitative. Is that because it hasn't always been like that? I mean, this has been a journey for many of the companies involved, but I mean, there was a time then a lot were really amorphous in a way and not so clear. But there seems to be more clarity and certainty right now in terms of pegging numbers and targets, at least on certain aspects like climate, right?
I think climate is definitely where we are the most advanced, by no means. But I think there's still an alphabet soup. And then if we add our own systems and so on to it. So I think we go back to materiality. Okay, what really matters? And I think there on the climate side, I mean, we're clearly starting to see that there are a few metrics that really matters. And that's, of course, how much are we decreasing our own emissions, whether it's in operations, underwriting, or investments. And then how much are we contributing, the impact that Jillian talks about. So what's the impact that we have through our impact investment or strategy in general? What's the impact that we have around our products and services? And I think there we're still at a very early stage. I think now we're starting to define it, but every insurance company still defines differently what is a sustainable product, right? And so there's no one methodology for it, but we have definitely spent some time this year together with our finance function, who now owns our non-financial reporting, to really put a very transparent definition of what we consider as a sustainable product. And then the next step will, of course, be, okay, so how do we can gather how much that actually is in terms of our total portfolio, and then to understand, okay, so what's the impact? But that I think we're only going to be able to do product by product. There's not kind of an impact measurement across that board. So yes, we're making advancements, but I think there's climate is still the area where we can start putting numbers behind it, and start seeing the difference that we make.
Thank you, Linda. And look, this has been a very fluid discussion, but your answers are actually leading us to the online poll question. So this is not over-engineered that they know what the online poll questions are. So let's so to the audience there, again, to the right-hand side of Attendify, there's the poll icon. So let's ask the first question. And then for the speakers, look at the chat box. We'll see, there's a bit of a 20-second delay. So I'll read through the question. The first question is, has your organization mapped its existing insurance and reinsurance products and solutions against the SDG? So the answer could be yes, no, or I don't know. You can be honest also. So again, the question is, has your organization mapped its existing insurance or reinsurance products and solutions against the sustainable development goals? So 3 answers. Hopefully it should not be too difficult on this, just to get us going with more discussion. And then we have a couple more questions after this warm-up question. So one of my colleagues will then post the results on the chat box when it's the results are stabilized. But it's suffice it to say, while we're waiting, it seems like, is it safe to assume that you have all done this in your organization somehow? I think Jillian is nodding. Oh, not yet. So you haven't done it yet, Linda and Karen, not yet? Okay, that would be interesting. But you've thought about it.
I'm going to be a bit provocative yet. Or
Yeah.
you really need to do it. So I think I think it might come from a couple of different angles, and I think that's what makes this panel so interesting. To say, is this a development framework, or is this a business framework, and what is actually the business's role in the SDGs? I think it's still a debate for me, and it's still, I think it's still an interesting topic of discussion.
Right. And for you, Karen, is it the same thing at store brand? Is it a yet, not yet thing also?
I think if you want to ask an organization to do an exercise, you need to understand, okay, what will be the outcome of such an exercise? It's quite timely, and resources are limited. So would we, by having done such a mapping, would we have come up with any huge gaps in our knowledge or in our risks and opportunities? Are there any risks and opportunities that we have missed because we haven't done such a mapping? And then I would like to say, I don't think there is. We know our portfolio well, but I don't think we need to do. It feels to me a little bit like it's something you would do to show off in your annual report, but is it really, would that really drive change within the organization? And I haven't honestly found that to be what we needed. We needed to do a very thorough materiality analysis, find out which are the SDGs that we can really have an impact and that will impact us severely. And we've identified a few of those, and then we come up with clear action, clear targets, measurement, and we track. But to do that for all the 17 SDGs has not been where we've prioritized our resources. I mean, we'll do a discussion whether we should have, but that hasn't been my take so far.
Okay, that's good. So that's also good to know that it could be different ways for different companies on how to get to the point of understanding materiality and later on impact. I'm not seeing the results on the chat, so why don't we just continue our discussion on materiality. Okay, now there is actually just came out right now. Question 1 results. Yes, 11.1%. No, 66.7%. I don't know, 22.2%. And I think we have quite a sizable crowd today, because I know we're into the hundreds for the day. And even if you slice that to a third, if you apply that to 100, that's quite meaningful in a way. This is not an academic survey. So what does this tell you? Jillian, I mean, you're a reinsurer. You would want your cedants, your insurance clients, to be doing the same thing, I hope, I suppose. But it seems like the vast majority have not done that mapping exercise, which you have done at Swiss Re.
Yeah, I think that, and Linda alluded to this a little bit before, we've all got different ways of thinking about what is sustainable business, right? So we're all trying to find a way, and we're all trying to find a way to focus. And that's also what both Karen and Linda have said, and we have to, because there were limited resources. We've got regulation, almost overwhelming regulatory and reporting requirements coming our way, so we have to choose. We have to choose how to spend our time. So yeah, I guess I'm not super surprised in a way about that result. But I have a comment to make here, and that one of the greatest advantages for us in this exercise that we ran was actually awareness raising. So sitting down with your underwriters and talking with them through their portfolio has been actually one of the greatest benefits, right? So it's not just this, it's not a sustainability team that's sort of separate from the underwriters. We're getting our underwriters thinking about the topic, and we're getting our underwriters thinking about these nuances. So I would say that's one of the major benefits. And then you focus, of course, right? We have to. But this awareness raising inside the organization, I think, is a really wonderful benefit of just sort of applying an SDG lens to our activities.
Right. Can I also touch on the materiality aspect? Because I think both Linda and Karen mentioned it, but there is also this concept of double materiality. Obviously, it's outside in, it's inside out as well. So basically, it's not simply how environmental and social issues, ESG issues, affect your business, it's how your insurance portfolio and investment portfolio would also impact the environment and society. Does that, when you say materiality, does that go both ways? Or, yeah. Okay, that's very good. All right, so I just wanted to make sure that people understood that that's what they meant. And it's not simply a one-way street, but also what is actually, are we actually leading to an environment that's safer and more stable, or are we violating human rights, etc.? That's also taken into account as well. So let's go to the second question. Since there's a bit of a time lag, why don't we go to the second of three questions? And the second question is, should an insurance industry-wide definition of sustainable insurance business be developed? So again, the answers are, there's a fourth option here. It's yes, no, maybe, I don't know. So so just because we're talking about, I mean, if you look at investment, I mean, there's increasingly, there's been ways to measure X% of assets under management are deemed to be ESG or responsible investment, etc. But that's not, seems to be not yet the case on insurance. When you look at a gross premiums written of $100 million, how much of that is sustainable? I'm pretty sure that if I ask ABC insurance company and XYZ insurance, I'll get two different answers on metrics. So the question here is that should there be an industry-wide definition of what is sustainable insurance business? So this is on the context of insurance portfolio, so that when you're presented there, like, oh, we write $1 million of premium as a total book of business, how are you quantifying what is sustainable and what is not sustainable? Or at least, how are you approaching that? Because I'm pretty sure that that is a question that's being asked as well. So while we're waiting for the results, perhaps we could check in again on our speakers on what they think about this in their companies. Who wants to start? It's easy.
We're all jumping up and down. From my end, I think, okay, let's go back to Karen mentioned that. What is it that we want to get out of that? Like, what is it that we're trying to achieve? Because if we look at how the industry is disclosing today, one company may say it's 20% of our portfolio is sustainable, and the other may say 2%, right? And they're operating in the same business. I think it's really, what do we want to achieve? Because there's also voices that said, well, actually, insurance is about sustainability. It's about providing that safety net beneath us all. So I think that the question around definition is very different from an insurance perspective compared to an investment perspective. But we do see, I mean, we see already with the EU taxonomy, we already see definitions starting to take form. We already have SASB asking also about this. So I think there's still room for kind of clarification around that, but it's definitely a movement. But the question is, what do we want those numbers for? What do we want?
Right. Hey, our audience is getting more efficient now. The results are fast now. So the answer is yes, 66.7%, no, 6.7%, maybe 19.9%, I don't know, 6.7. Karen, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I can. I think yes, if it drives the purpose, if it helps people internally to come up with new products and services, if it helps to get management attraction, by all means. But I do think if it's from a financial point of view that we report out, I think there's so many other regulation frameworks that are coming into place, the EU taxonomy, that we do need to report up on, and that are starting to materialize, like what is a crisp, clear definition of something, say a green revenue or a gender pay gap, or there's going to be so many of these clear KPIs that the industry can gather around. So say that we did it and we came up with, as you say, a number that's 20% of our portfolio was ESG aligned. It would just be an arbitrary number. It won't be able an investor to compare Storebrand to another company. So what should we do that number with? I mean, if the assumption that a company puts into that number varies across the companies, the number is just a number. So then we at least have to really agree on the assumptions and the kind of the calculations and the way we identify things. So I'm hesitant. I see that the group says that, just because I don't see the practicality used for the work that I do, what it would help me with. But I'm open.
Okay,
so frank answer, maybe.
No, that's very valid. That's good to.
There's so many frameworks. There's so many frameworks, and we don't need more. We need to actually make the frameworks that we have to report on more cohesive, more harmonized, instead of just adding new frameworks. That's at least I can say from the burden that we have on reporting now. It should definitely be the big actors out there, and I'm happy to see that that's what's happening, are actually converging around a few main topics that will be kind of the basis for what is sustainability. I don't know if we should add another complex system on top of that, but I mean, what do you guys think?
Right. Let me just ask a specific question, because you and I think it was Linda also, I'm not sure, but you mentioned the EU taxonomy. To my understanding, let's just talk about, so it covers investment, lending, insurance. To my understanding, insurance in the taxonomy is largely credited from an adaptation perspective only. It doesn't count insurance from a mitigation perspective. Is that correct, or did I read it incorrectly? Maybe this is insurance portfolios, right? So it's normally like, the thinking is that if you offer natural catastrophe insurance, that's a benefit. But whatever Linda was saying about net zero insurance is not necessarily there. So do you think that the taxonomy then captures already what the breadth of insurance contributions to sustainability, or no?
No, not at all. I mean, the taxonomy is obviously not a fully developed framework. I mean, it's only now for the two, the climates. So we have to come up with it. There has to be a social taxonomy. I mean, it's just definitely in its infancy. But and there's a lot of critique out there. It's very easy to critique it. But what I do see it helps is that hopefully there will be conversation, a harmonization, and a possibility in the future to compare apples to apples. It will never completely be apples to apples, but at least a little bit more harmonization of those KPIs or pay KPIs, so they can be useful both as an internal benchmark and of course eventually for investor to look at. But it's not there yet. But I have high ambitions for the taxonomy, a few years down the track.
Right. Yeah. Just because our own experience on net zero insurance, because this is really a concept that has been pushed by the PSI, and the fact that insured emissions was not really viewed before as even as a metric, or as something that could actually lead to facilitates emissions, right? Just like financing through lending or investment. So I think it's an interesting debate on how insurance actually, as Linda put it, actually enables many things, and that's really in addition to what one can do as an investor, but also as an insurer. So my experience is that even though we're talking about Net Zero Insurance Alliance and it's growing, perhaps arbitrarily 9 out of 10 people you talk out there probably don't know what is net zero insurance to begin with. So Linda gave some insights on what you can do as an insurer on that, but I think there's a journey to be had on this. So it would be interesting because I guess sustainability means different things to different people. Some people will answer it from an environmental slant, climate. Some would add biodiversity there. Then there's a task force on nature-related financial disclosure that's coming up after TCFD. Then there's a financial inclusion agenda, etc. So we still have 11 minutes. So why don't I ask the third and last question? So we go deeper and deeper into the topic. So the last question, and perhaps something that we could end with, is which of the following metrics is least developed in the context of attribution to insurance and reinsurance portfolios? Is it A, carbon emissions? Is it B, climate resilience, so impacts? Is it C, nature impacts? Is it D, social inclusion? So the question is the least developed, not the most advanced, the least developed. So when you think about insurance portfolios, have people thought least about emissions? Have they thought about least about resilience and adaptation? Is it the least about on nature impacts and how my insurance portfolio is leading to biodiversity loss or ecosystem degradation or something nature positive? Or is my insurance portfolio bridging the social exclusion and social inequality out there? Is that people that haven't thought about that the least? So here it's we're talking about which is the most least thought about metric in the context of insurance and reinsurance portfolios. So here, we did say that we're moving to quantitative. So there's nothing more quantitative than metrics, right? So and Linda had already said like, okay, there's climate and carbon is the same everywhere as a unit. Resilience. Oh, I just read the other day that the UN Race to Zero has now come up with a metrics for resilience. So that could be interesting to look into. Nature impacts in the context of insurance, probably interesting to see what people say. And then there's social inclusion. Look, this is not purely an environmental agenda. There's a very strong social imperative. And if we're just, again, reminding everyone, if you really look at the SDGs, one of the underlying tenets is to leave no one behind. That is really a tenet, so to speak, of the SDGs. So there is a social agenda on all of this, and that is to leave no one behind. So while we're waiting for the results, I'm curious to find out what the results will be. Perhaps I can, okay, it's already there. You can see it, right? Okay, just talking to Karen and the others. So let me read it. Carbon emissions, 15.4%. Climate resilience, 0%. Seems like that's on a lot of people are thinking about. Nature impacts, 53.8%. So that's the biggest chunk, least developed. And then there's social inclusion, 30.8%. Jillian, well, Linda had her chance to talk about climate. Why don't you talk about nature? And it seems like nature here is more than half in terms of like the least developed thinking. Again, does that surprise you, Jillian? And
No,
yeah,
not at all.
yeah, yeah. And so, how do you feel with that? Like, do you feel like we need to get that sooner or later, or we're missing the point? Or how does that make you feel that it's the least developed?
So I think we're really missing something major, that it is the least developed, but I think we know that, right? And our awareness, the industry's awareness is increasing on that rapidly. Hence, we have the TNFDs. Hence, there's a number of us as companies talking about biodiversity, about ecosystems. So I think the awareness is rising, thankfully. It needs to, right? Because we're not going to solve the climate problem if we don't solve the biodiversity problem, right? They're very, very much interlinked. So whilst that's a scary number, 54%, it's true, but I think the industry's moving in this direction. So I actually feel confident that we're going to be doing something about it.
Right. So I think you're correct about that. And that's why there's a lot of nature discussion at COP26 right now, because the real issue is not, in a way, emissions per se. It's about the carbon balance in the atmosphere right now. And if you really look at the core of it, what nature does is something that we learned all in school. It's photosynthesis. And so the more intact nature is, the more they are more effective in storing and capturing carbon. And I'm not simply talking about forests. It all goes to seagrasses, kelp forests, mangroves, and what have you, wetlands, and what have you, that are all natural sinks. So I think it would be really wrong to say that free and clean energy will bring us there simply and say that because if we have free and clean energy and we continue to destroy nature, I think it will just rapidly lead to a rapid demise if we simply do that. So this is really the nature and climate agenda coming together. Okay, final thoughts from you, Linda, given those results. What did that make you think?
I was actually surprised. I would have said social inclusion. I think that's where we are actually not really measuring anything. And I think where we as an industry in general are really struggling with kind of making sure to close the protection gap, to offer affordable insurance. And then I think, I mean, fundamentally, the big challenge with climate change is going to be that it's going to hit the people that are underinsured the most. So I was quite surprised that nature got a higher vote on that.
Yeah, it's not so far off though. It's 30%. It's still a very considerable sum, I have to say. But it's good that, it's very interesting to hear your insights because none of this was premeditated. So we're going as we go along. And so it's good that we're getting this insights from the audience. Karen, we have a few minutes left. You have the final word there.
Thanks. I think both nature, I mean, climate in a way is really hard, but it's also very easy. There's kind of a one and zero at the end. When it comes to nature, it's much more complex. So what do you measure? What are the KPIs or the principal adverse impacts that you're trying to measure? Is it a land denigration? How do you say that again? Is it loss of biodiversity? Is how much of your portfolio insurance business is linked to loss of the forest, deforestation? So it's a complex pollution on land, pollution in water. It's such a huge topic, nature. But that's why I'm very happy to see that the frameworks are coming in place. Again, the global cooperation around Task Force for Nature related disclosure is coming into place. So we will be there in a year or two times when this has become much clearer when it comes to nature. So we in a way, I don't understand why we as a global community been so late to look at the two sides of the coin. You have climate and you have your nature, and you really need to focus on both of them. So nature is the next big climate or the next big topic when it comes to ESG. Then you have the social dimension, which is wide. It can be a lot of things, but there are issues there such as minimum wage and the gender pay gap. Those are very concrete, measurable things that we can look at, both as a finance industry and as an insurance industry, really map our portfolios when it comes to those criteria, because they will be part of, again, the new framework coming up, the principle of adverse impacts. So I think there's going to be more concrete things to look at and to measure yourself against when it comes to both nature and social going forward. Having said that, I'm so sorry, but I have to jump out of the meeting. I had a 2 o'clock hard stop, but I pushed it.
That's fine. We're almost there. Karen, go, and I'll just close with the last minute that we have.
Lovely.
So thank you so much to all of you. And for me, the final message is very simple. The PSI has a number of things as priorities: the Net Zero Insurance Alliance, the TCFD project phase 2. There's a nature positive insurance series that we just finished that will continue next year and push forward. We just launched the V20 Sustainable Insurance Facility on resilience and adaptation. We are working on life and health insurance and their contribution to sustainability. And so all of this in the PSI comes together through an initiative called the PSI Insurance SDGs Initiative. So as complex and challenging as it is, we're here, to those who are watching us today, we're here to help you navigate that jungle, so to speak, that alphabet soup, whatever you want to call it, and make sense out of it, and in the context, obviously, of the insurance business. So I think this has been really productive for us, insightful to take away as we digest the things that are coming out of the COPs, COP15 and COP26, and what is happening in the real world out there. Again, we've consumed our 50 minutes very fast, but I enjoyed the conversation, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. Thank you so much, Linda. Thank you, Jillian, and thank you to Karen. And thank you to all of you for joining us today, and have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.